I will be reading The Land of Sad Orange by Ghassan Kanafani. We left Jaffa to Akka. I felt no agony. It was like going from a city to another for a holiday. For several days, nothing painful happened. I was happy because this move gave me a nice break from school. Things started to look differently when Akka was attacked. That night was hard on you and me. The women were praying, men were bitter and silent. You and me and all the kids our age didn't understand what was going on. But that night we started to gather the threads of the story. When the Israeli soldiers left, after threatening and swearing, a big van stopped in front of our home. A few things, mainly beds and blankets, when I saw your mother rise up into the van, then your aunt, followed by the little ones. Your father picked you up and threw you over the furniture in the same way he lifted me over his head and threw me in the iron box at the top of the van. Then there was your brother, Riyadh, sitting in silence. Before having myself settled properly, the car started moving, and Akka started to fade, little by little, through the ascending zigzag road that led to Rasa Nakora. The sky was cloudy. A touch of cold air chilled my body. Riyadh sat calmly with his legs propped on top of the box, his back resting against the furniture, staring at the sky. I was sitting in silence, holding my knees by my arms and putting my chin between my legs. All along the way there were orange groves. A sense of fear and anxiety spread over everyone. The car moved with difficulty over the wet soil, and from a distance we heard the sound of gunshots, as if bidding us farewell. This would be figurative language. When Rats and the Korab appeared, the car stopped. The women came down from among the belongings and went to a farmer who was squatting in front of a basket of oranges. They picked up the oranges and we heard them lamenting. At the moment, I realized that oranges are something precious and that they are dear to our hearts. The women brought the fruits and went back to the car. Your father stretched out his arm, took an orange and stared at it silently, then burst into tears, just like a miserable little child. That would be another simile. And the oranges, if we have not noticed, will be symbolism. Symbolic, meaning for the oranges. Okay. In Vasanakora, our car stopped among many other cars. The men gave up their guns to the police officers who were there for that reason. When our turn came, the table was full of hand and machine guns, and I watched the long line of cars enter Lebanon. And we will say entered Lebanon, that we have a change of setting here. So we went from Akka, Palestine, to Lebanon. Leaving long behind them the land of orange. So we have the symbolism in the setting. I started wailing. Your mother was still looking in silence at the oranges. In your father's eyes were the reflection of all the orange trees he had left behind for the Israelis. All the clean orange trees he had planted one by one glittered in his face. He failed to stop the tears that filled up his eyes when he came to face the head of the police officer. When we reached Saide in the afternoon, we became refugees. And this would be also, if you haven't noticed, we have second person narration. The use of you means that Ghassan is pulling us, the reader, into the story. The road absorbed us among many other things. Your father suddenly became older than before. He looked as if he hadn't slept for a long time. He was standing among the belongings, which were thrown over the side of the road. I knew if I were to say any word, he would explode in my face. Damn your father, damn you. These two swears were clear on his face. Even I, who was brought up in a Catholic conservative school at that moment, doubted that God wanted to make his people happy. I doubted that God could hear and see anything, everything. All of the paintings that show God loving the children and smiling at them look like a lie, among other lies told by people who build conservative schools for which they can charge extra fees. I was sure that the God we knew in Palestine left her as well, and that he was a refugee somewhere in this world, and that he was incapable of solving his own problems, and that we, the refugees who are sitting in the footpath, were waiting for a new destiny to find us a solution. We were responsible to find a solution ourselves. We were responsible for finding a roof over our heads. The pain struck the head of the naive young boy. Night was awful, and the dark started to fall bit by bit. I was frightened, thinking that I'm going to spend the night on the pavement, filled my spirit with dreadful nightmares. No one was there to calm me down. I couldn't find any person to turn to. Your father's rigid silence raised more fear in my heart, and the oranges in your mother's hand ignited fire in my chest. Everyone was silent. Everyone was looking at the black road, hoping that some solution would materialize from the corner and take us to a certain shelter. Then destiny came. It came in the form of your uncle, who had arrived in town a few days earlier. He was our destiny. We have a new character, the uncle. Your uncle wasn't a man of real values, and when he found himself on the road, he became more savage. He went to a house where a Jewish family lived, opened the door, threw the content of the room away, and cried to their face, "Go to Palestine." For sure, they didn't go to Palestine, but intimidated by his frustration and anger, they went to another room, leaving him to enjoy a roof and a floor. Your uncle led us to that room. We were heaped with his family and his belongings. We slept on the floor and were covered by the men's coats. In the morning, we were woke up. The men were still sitting in the chairs. The tragedy started to penetrate through our bodies, all our bodies. We didn't stay in Side long enough, just 3 days. Your uncle's room wasn't wide enough even for half of us. Your mother asked your father either to find himself a job or to return to the oranges. Your father exploded in her face. His voice was trembling with rage. Then our family problems began. The happy, strong, bonded family we had once been was left behind along with the orange groves, the house, and the martyrs. Martyrs would be people that died either for a religious cause or an ideology, such as ownership to a land and a place and a region, in the case of these martyrs. I didn't know from where your father got the money. I knew that he had sold your mother's jewelry, which he had bought her once to make her happy and proud of him, but the jewelry wasn't enough to solve our problems. Other resources were needed. Had your father borrowed any money? Had he sold any belongings that he brought with him without telling us? I couldn't tell. But I still remember that we moved to a certain suburb of Side, and there your father sat on the high rock and smiled for the first time. He was waiting for the 15th of May to return with the victorious armies. The 15th of May came after a bitter period of time. Exactly at 12 o'clock, he nudged me with his foot while I was still sleeping and said in a voice thundering with great expectation, "Get up! Go see the Arab armies entering Palestine." I woke up in a frenzy and we ran barefoot all along the hills in the middle of the night till we reached the street, which was a full kilometer away from the village. All of us youngsters and the elderly ran breathlessly like idiots. We saw the lights of the cars beaming from a distance, traveling towards Ras Nakora. When we reached the street, we felt cold, but your father's crazy shouting made us forget about everything. He started to run after the cars like a small boy. He waved at them. He shouted in a broken voice until he went out of breath, but he kept running after the cars like a small child. We ran beside him, shouting like him, as the admirable soldiers looked toward us from under the helmets with silence and stiffness. We were all breathless. Through your father kept running in spite of 50 years. He was throwing cigarettes to the soldiers. He kept running and we kept following like a small herd of goats. The procession of cars vanished suddenly and we returned home, tired and breathless. Your father became silent and speechless. When a passing car flashed its light at his face, tears were spread all over his cheeks. After that day, life passed slowly. We were deceived by announcements and by the bitter truth. Grimness started to invade our faces. Your father found it difficult to talk about Palestine or the happy days in his orange groves or his houses. We were the walls of his tragedy and cunning enough to know the meaning behind his early morning shouting, "Go to the hill and never come back before noon." We knew that he wanted to distract us from asking for breakfast. Things began to deteriorate. Any simple issue was enough to ignite your father's anger. When one of us asked him something, he would jump as if electrocuted and then scan us with his eyes. A damned idea festered in his mind. He stood up suddenly, as if he'd just found a solution to his dilemma. Out of feeling that he was strong enough to put an end to his tragedy, and out of the horror one feels taking a disastrous action, He started talking nonsense. He started turning left and right as if looking for something we couldn't see. Then he jumped up on a box which we brought with us from Akka. He emptied its contents in a hysterically frightening way, as if led by her maternal intuition. Your mother must have grasped what was going on in his mind. Suddenly, she started to push us away from the house and asked us to run to the hill. Against her will, we struck our faces to the window and stuck our little ears to its wooden frame. Frightened, we heard your father saying, I would kill them and kill myself. I want to finish it. I want to. Uh-oh. We started peeping through cracks of the door. We saw your father, splayed on the ground, breathing heavily, gnawing his teeth. Your mother was watching him from a distance. Her face was full of horror. At first, I didn't understand what was going on. I remember that moment I saw the black pistol by his side. I started running as fast as I could, as if escaping a phantom, which had already appeared suddenly. I ran away from the house towards the hill. The further I ran from the house, the further I felt myself moving away from my childhood. I started to realize that our lives will never be the same. Things were no longer as simple as they once were, and life was no longer something you eagerly look forward to. The situation had reached the point of having a shot to the head as the only thing a father could offer his children. So from now on, we had to watch our step, behave ourselves, keep quiet when father speaks about his problems. We wouldn't ask for food no matter how hungry we got. We will show obedience by shaking our heads and smiling when he shouts, Go to the hills and don't come back till noon. Your father was still there shaking with fever that evening, long after the darkness had spread over the house. Your mother sat beside him. Our eyes glistened like cats in the dark. Our lips were sealed as if they were never open, as if they were remnants of an old injury. We were heaped up there, withdrawn from our childhood, away from the land of oranges. Oranges that died, an old farmer once told us, if watered by strange hands. Your father was still sick, thrown down on his bed, and your mother was gnawing tragic tears that never left her eyes. I snuck into the room an outcast. I saw your father's face quiver with broken rage, and I saw at the same time that black pistol on the low table. Near it was the orange. The orange was wrinkled and dry. And that would be the end of The Land of Sad Orange by Ghassan Kanafani. And we can go through after to annotate more, but this will be our setting. So our setting did change. That's important. We have our setting is going to be Jaffa to Akkad to Lebanon. And we have our type of narration, which is going to be second person. So we are supposed to be in the story, but we're a kid. And you could say second, so there's a first person narrator. So there's a boy narrating our story. I felt no agony. So the boy, we could say first person narration, we meet a narrator, but then second person where the reader is pulled into the story. And for point of view, it will be important to note that this is a young boy because he doesn't fully grasp what is going on until the end of our story, when I would have called that an epiphany. When he says he finally realizes what is going on. And this is our climax. When the narrator learns that the people that he was going to kill was actually them. When you're interpreting literature, you can say maybe the dad meant the Israeli army that had invaded, or maybe he meant the children, because then here, so no matter what the father meant, we can interpret that, but the narrator interprets it as if his father was going to kill him, because he says, or our father, because it's the friend's father, the narrator's friend's father. The situation had reached the point of having a shot to the head as the only thing a father could offer his children. So I would call this the falling action, because this is when the narrator is reflecting on what he just saw with this father wanting to basically end all of this suffering through death. And our resolution is this father going to end up killing himself at some point? It's not answered. He keeps the weapon there next to him. And guns and weapons would definitely be a symbol in the story as well, that we will talk about in the next lesson.